Imagine standing in the heart of mainland Southeast Asia more than 1,000 years ago. The air is thick, heavy, alive. Cicadas scream from the trees. Monsoon clouds boil over the horizon. The jungles stretch endlessly, swallowing mountains, rivers, villages, and the very roads that dared to challenge them. And, hidden somewhere within this overwhelming green world, something extraordinary begins to take shape. Something powerful, something destined to reshape the region's history. In this vast and unforgiving landscape, an empire is about to be born. But the birth of the Khmer Empire did not begin with triumph. It began with struggle. Fragmented chiefdoms, warring tribes, and competing influences from both India and China dominated the region. Dozens of small kingdoms fought for power around the Tonle Sap, each rising and falling like sparks from a dying fire. There was no unity, no central authority, no king powerful enough to command the land. Only the jungle ruled. Only nature truly held dominance. By the year 700 CE, the region was a patchwork of civilizations. The Chenla kingdoms, both land Chenla and water Chenla, were locked in endless cycles of internal conflict. Monarchs rose quickly and fell even faster. Floods destroyed crops. Droughts ruined armies. Trade fluctuated unpredictably. People lived, fought, and prayed, yet very few imagined anything beyond survival. Greatness seemed impossible in such chaos, and yet, in times of disorder, ambition finds room to grow. The Khmer people were resilient, shaped by hardship and sharpened by the natural world around them. They learned to tame rivers, build canals, carve fields from wild forests, and move enormous stones with techniques still debated today. They studied Indian religions and governance, blending them with their own local traditions. Slowly, a sense of identity began to form, a belief that they were destined for more. But destiny needs a spark. It needs a leader bold enough to reshape the world, and that leader would arrive in the early 9th century. Around 802 CE, a powerful figure emerged from the confusion of the Chenla states. His name was Jayavarman II, and his arrival marked the beginning of a transformation unlike anything Southeast Asia had ever seen. But before his rise, the land was not a kingdom, it was a battlefield. For decades, Jayavarman moved across the region, uniting fractured chiefdoms, forging alliances, and defeating rivals. Step by step, he moved toward the mountains of Phun Kulen, a sacred place where the gods were believed to watch the world from above. Here, high above the plains and safely away from foreign eyes, Jayavarman II made a declaration that would change everything. Surrounded by priests, nobles, and warriors, he performed a ritual that symbolically severed ties with foreign domination. He declared himself Chakravartin, a universal monarch. It was not just a political statement. It was a cosmic announcement. He wasn't simply claiming a throne. He was claiming destiny itself. And suddenly the scattered lands began to unite. A new era started. The Khmer Empire, later known as Angkor, was born. Yet, declarations alone do not build empires. Jayavarman II spent the next years establishing a central authority capable of controlling water, roads, trade, and religion. He moved capitals multiple times, searching for the perfect location, the place where geography and spirituality aligned. His movements were not random. They were strategic. Every shift in power redefined the political landscape. Every city he built expanded the idea of a unified Khmer state. By the early 800 ACE, the foundations were laid, a monarchy supported by priests, empowered by rituals, and legitimized by divine association. A network of roads connected distant provinces. A hierarchy of officials ensured order, and perhaps most importantly, the concept of the Devaraja, the god-king, emerged. This institution would become the spiritual backbone of the empire, elevating the Khmer kings beyond mortal rulers to living embodiments of divine authority. The jungles that once resisted human ambition were now being shaped by it. Rivers were redirected. Reservoirs were carved into the earth. Terraces, temples, and roads spread outward like veins from the heart of the empire. What had once been scattered communities began to function as a single organism. But the rise of the Khmer Empire was not only political or religious. It was also deeply technological. The genius of Khmer irrigation began to reveal itself. They did not simply farm, they engineered landscapes. They mastered the unpredictable monsoons by storing water on a scale the world had never seen. Their knowledge of hydrology turned their empire into the agricultural powerhouse of Southeast Asia. By the mid-9th century, the Khmer were no longer a group of rival tribes. They were a growing superpower, unified by belief, strengthened by innovation, and protected by rulers who claimed divine authority. What Jayavarman II began would be refined and expanded by the kings who followed him. And yet, for all the progress, the story of the Khmer is not one of peace. It is a story of ambition sharpened by fear. A story of kings who believed they were chosen by the gods, and therefore entitled to reshape the world by any means necessary. A story filled with sacrifice, betrayal, engineering miracles, devastating wars, and towering temples carved from stone. The jungle kingdom had awoken, and the world was about to feel its presence, because the next chapter introduces the man who would take this fragile beginning and turn it into a dynasty of power, a warrior king who would not just unite the Khmer, but redefine what kingship meant in Southeast Asia. A king who believed the gods had chosen him personally. A king named Jayavarman II. Picture the landscape of Southeast Asia in the final years of the 8th century. A world where kingdoms did not simply rise, they fought their way into existence. A world where power was constantly shifting, where chieftains ruled by strength alone, and where every river, every forest, every mountain hid a rival waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a time of relentless conflict, a time when leaders lasted only as long as their armies remained loyal. In this unforgiving environment, a single man began carving his destiny out of chaos. His name was Jayavarman II, and he would become the architect of one of the most extraordinary empires in human history. His early life is shrouded in mystery, but the fragments we have paint a picture of a man forged in hardship. Some sources suggest he spent time as a hostage in the powerful Javanese kingdom of Sailendra, witnessing firsthand the political machinery and religious rituals of one of Southeast Asia's greatest superpowers. If this is true, then Jayavarman did not simply learn warfare, he learned statecraft, he learned monumentality, he learned the psychological power of kingship, and he returned home not as a captive, but as a visionary. When he came back to the Cambodian mainland, he did not return to peace. He returned to division. The Chenla territories were splintered, plagued by internal disputes, regional rebellions, and external pressures. Rival chiefs ruled from their fortified settlements. Influence from Java, China, and India pulled the region in competing directions. There was no unity, no stability, no future that anyone could see. But Jayavarman II saw something different. He saw potential. He saw an opportunity to create what no one before him had been able to achieve, a unified kingdom powerful enough to resist foreign control and assert dominance across the region. He began forging alliances, building armies, and establishing new political bases. One by one, he subdued local rulers, not always through violence, but often through diplomacy, ritual authority, and the promise of stability. His journey across the region was not just a military campaign. It was a pilgrimage of power. Wherever he traveled, he gathered supporters, priests, warriors, nobles, laborers. He carried not only weapons, but ideas. Ideas borrowed from India, where rulers claimed divine connections. Ideas borrowed from Java, where monumental architecture became a visual language of power. Ideas shaped by the traditions of the Khmer people themselves, who believed the world was governed by cosmic forces. By the late 8th century, Jayavarman II had solidified his influence over much of the land. But he knew conquest alone would not secure his legacy. He needed something bigger than force. Something eternal, something that would bind his authority to the heavens themselves. The answer lay atop a sacred mountain, Phnom Kulen. It was here, in the year 802 CE, that Jayavarman II performed one of the most significant rituals in Southeast Asian history. Surrounded by priests trained in elaborate Indian rites, he participated in a ceremony establishing the Devaraja, the god-king. This ritual proclaimed him the earthly manifestation of Shiva, the supreme ruler of the universe. It severed the symbolic ties to foreign powers, announced the end of fragmentation, and declared a new beginning for the Khmer people. It was a moment that merged politics with spirituality, earthly strategy with cosmic legitimacy. Before this day, kings ruled because they were strong. After this day, they ruled because they were divine. The declaration of the Devaraja was not merely ceremonial, it was psychological warfare. It meant that opposing Jayavarman II was not just rebellion, it was sacrilege. It meant his rule was not temporary, it was eternal. And it meant the kingdom he was building had a destiny greater than any seen before in the region. With this divine mandate, Jayavarman II began reshaping the landscape. He established a centralized court, appointed regional governors, standardized rituals, and built a network of officials who would ensure loyalty across the kingdom. His movements across the region, first Indrapura, then Hariharalaya, and other capitals, were not signs of instability, but deliberate steps in consolidating power. Every new capital was a statement. Every structure built under his rule reinforced the idea of unity. Every road he commissioned tied distant provinces to the royal center. The Khmer Empire was no longer a dream. It was now a functioning organism, propelled by agriculture, controlled by faith, and protected by the divine right of its king. And yet, Jayavarman II was not a king who sat on a golden throne, issuing commands from safety. He was a warrior. He led campaigns personally. He defended territories with relentless determination. His rule was carved not just in stone, but in blood. The peace he pursued was shaped by necessity, not luxury. Every decision he made was driven by the understanding that the empire he was building could collapse overnight if he failed to secure it. But what truly set Jayavarman II apart was his vision. He did not see the Khmer lands as a collection of small kingdoms. He saw them as a single world, a world governed by order, hierarchy, and divine purpose. He laid the groundwork for the intensive water management systems that would later fuel the empire's agricultural dominance. He promoted the Sanskrit language for inscriptions, weaving the Khmer state into the cultural orbit of India. And he established the foundation for the massive temple-building tradition that would define Angkor's legacy. Jayavarman II died around 835 CE, but by the time of his death, the transformation was complete. The Khmer kingdom was no longer a fragile collection of territories. It was a rising empire, And though his successors would build cities far larger than any he knew, construct temples more magnificent than he imagined, and wage wars on a scale he never witnessed, they all walked in the shadow he created. He had given them unity. He had given them divine legitimacy. He had given them the mandate to rule. Without Jeroboam II, there would be no Angkor Wat, no Bayan, no sprawling metropolis of 1 million people. He was the spark that lit the flame. The king who refused to accept a fragmented world and instead rewrote the future. And that future would soon take shape in a place destined to become the heart of the empire, a place called Angkor. Imagine the sound first, not the sound of birds or wind or rivers, but the sound of chisels against stone, thousands of them. The sound of wooden rollers creaking beneath the weight of massive sandstone blocks. The sound of shouted orders echoing across a landscape that is being transformed on a scale the world has never seen. This is not just a city being built. This is a civilization carving its identity into the earth. Welcome to Angkor, the beating heart of the Khmer Empire. By the early 9th century, after the reign of Jeroboam II, the Khmer world was ready to erupt into its golden age. And the place where that eruption would manifest was a vast floodplain north of the Tonle Sap, the great lake that breathes with the seasons, swelling during the monsoon and shrinking during the dry months. It was here that a sequence of Khmer kings decided to build not just a capital, but a masterpiece, a city that would become, at its height, the largest urban area on the planet, a city that dwarfed medieval Paris and rivaled the size of ancient Rome, a city so advanced that modern scientists are still trying to understand how it functioned. Angkor was not built in a single moment. It was built through generations, each king adding temples, canals, reservoirs, and roads until the capital became a colossal organism, a deliberately designed world of stone, water, and power. The earliest core of this world, Hariharalaya, emerged around the time of Jeroboam II's successors. Located near the Roluas area, it was a modest beginning, but it established something crucial, the idea that the capital was not just a political center, but a sacred center, a place where gods and kings converged. The Khmer did not simply build cities, they engineered them. They sculpted landscapes with the precision of architects and the devotion of priests. The jungle around Angkor was dense, but instead of fearing it, the Khmer reshaped it. Trees were cleared, rivers were redirected. Massive canals were carved across the land, like veins connecting the empire's heart to its limbs. One of the greatest innovations was the construction of enormous reservoirs called bares. The first major one, the Indratataka, was built under Indravarman I in the late 9th century. It was not merely a water tank, it was a statement of divine authority and agricultural genius. The Khmer learned to control the monsoon, transforming seasonal chaos into predictable abundance. These reservoirs fed vast rice fields, capable of supporting hundreds of thousands of people. With food security came population growth. With population growth came specialization, wealth, and the power to build even more ambitious monuments. And so Angkor began to grow. By the time Yasovarman I ascended the throne in the late 9th century, Angkor was poised for its first major transformation. He constructed the vast eastern Bare, a reservoir so enormous that it is visible from space. More importantly, he built Khmerempiredocumentary, a temple mountain symbolizing Mount Meru, the cosmic axis in Hindu belief. This was not just architecture. This was cosmology turned into stone. Standing atop Khmerempiredocumentary during the height of the empire, one would see a city stretching endlessly toward the horizon, a living testament to the king's divine mandate. But this was only the beginning. Throughout the 10th and 11th centuries, Angkor evolved into a sprawling complex of temples, palaces, and urban settlements. Kings like Rajendravarman and Suryavarman discanded the hydraulic network, connecting villages to canals, canals to reservoirs, and reservoirs to the lake. Angkor became a machine self-sustaining, productive, and capable of supporting an unprecedented population. Traders arrived from India, China, and the Malay world. Markets bustled with goods. Artisans carved images of gods, kings, and mythical creatures into sandstone walls. Priests performed rituals in towering sanctuaries. Diplomats crossed grand causeways lined with divine guardians. Angkor was alive, vibrant, and growing at a pace that astonished foreigners who visited its gates. But nothing prepared the world for the next stage of its evolution. The arrival of Suryavarman II in the early 12th century would forever change the identity of the capital. His reign produced the most iconic structure in Southeast Asian history, Angkor Wat. But before this monumental temple rose, Angkor itself underwent a transformation into a megacity, a meticulously planned urban world with highways, water channels, defensive moats, and monumental gateways. By this time, the Khmer had mastered stone. They no longer built with perishable materials alone. They carved temples that mimicked the structure of the universe, creating microcosms of heaven on earth. Every tower, every corridor, every bas-relief served a purpose, and Angkor was filled with them. Dozens of temple complexes that each functioned as religious centers, administrative hubs, or symbols of royal legitimacy. It is difficult to imagine the full scale of Angkor. The city covered an area of nearly 400 square miles. Some historians estimate it supported between 700,000 and 1 million people, numbers unparalleled anywhere else on Earth at that time. Roads connected Angkor to distant provinces. Watchtowers protected trade routes. Reservoirs ensured food security. The Khmer Empire was no longer just a political entity. It was an urban civilization far ahead of its time. Standing inside Angkor during this era must have been overwhelming. For a traveler arriving from distant lands, the sight of moats larger than lakes, temples rising like stone mountains, and crowds of worshippers moving in endless streams would evoke awe and disbelief. For the Khmer people, it was proof that their kings were chosen by the gods. Yet the brilliance of Angkor was not just in its temples. It was in the water, the lifeblood of the empire. The hydraulic system of Angkor was one of the most sophisticated networks ever created before the modern age. It balanced monsoon floods, regulated irrigation, and ensured rice production remained stable even in years of unpredictable weather. Without this system, Angkor could not exist. With it, Angkor thrived, but brilliance often carries a hidden cost. As Angkor expanded, so did the expectations placed on its kings. Every ruler was expected to build, to expand, to surpass his predecessors. Every king had to prove his divine right through construction, conquest, or both. The city became a monument to competition as much as devotion. Yet for the moment, Angkor only rose higher, because the next chapter in its story belonged to ambition, and that ambition belonged to Suryavarman II, a king whose determination would lead to the creation of one of the greatest temples the world has ever seen. To understand Angkor at its peak, you must first understand the man who built its crown jewel. History remembers many kings, but only a few dared to call themselves gods, and among them the Khmer rulers stand in a league of their own. Their story wasn't simply about crowns, armies, or territory. It was about something far more dangerous, the belief that a king could become divine, eternal, untouchable, a living bridge between heaven and earth. And for nearly 600 years, that belief shaped every stone carved, every war fought, and every betrayal whispered behind palace doors. To understand the rise of the Khmer Empire, you must understand Betrayal, the cult of the God King. It began in the early 9th century, when Jayavarman II stood atop Phnom Kulin and performed a ritual meant to break all ties with foreign powers. That ceremony didn't just create a king, it created a god. The message was unmistakable. The ruler of the Khmer was not merely chosen by the heavens, he was the heavens. His word was cosmic order. His body was the physical form of the divine. His rule was destiny made flesh. From that moment onward, every Khmer ruler inherited more than a throne. They inherited a mantle that demanded perfection. They had to be strong enough to conquer, wise enough to govern, spiritual enough to guide, and ruthless enough to silence every threat. The stakes were absolute. If a king displayed weakness, the entire kingdom risked falling out of favor with the gods. A bad harvest, a flood, a rebellion. The people looked at their king and wondered if the divine had abandoned him. And if they believed he had lost heaven's blessing, they would replace him quickly and violently. The Betrayal system became the backbone of Khmer politics. It justified everything: massive temple construction, endless wars, crushing taxes, forced labor, all for one purpose: to keep the image of the divine king alive. When Jayavarman II demanded a temple so vast, so perfect, so symmetrical that it felt impossible, no one questioned him. If a god ordered a mountain carved from stone, you carved it. If a god demanded a city bigger than any in Asia, you built it. The king's ambitions weren't personal, they were sacred. But divine power came with a shadow. A king who claimed to be a god had no room for mistakes. Every decision became a cosmic burden. Every enemy became an enemy of the heavens. And every member of the royal court, from generals to priests to cousins hungry for the throne, watched for even the slightest misstep. Because if a king failed, they would not hesitate to destroy him in the name of restoring cosmic balance. Inside the palace walls, where gold reflected torchlight and whispers carried like smoke, divine authority became both protection and danger. Advisors bowed deeply in daylight, but plotted silently at night. Generals pledged loyalty on sacred relics while counting the days until they could strike. Even priests, the guardians of the spiritual world, could betray a king if they believed the gods desired a new ruler on the throne. The king's divinity was supposed to unite the empire, but often it poisoned it. Imagine life for the common people. For farmers, waking at sunrise to tend rice fields. For builders, carving sandstone blocks until their hands bled. For artisans, crafting sculptures that had to be perfect or discarded. To them, the king was not a distant monarch. He was the center of the universe. His glory was their glory. His temples were their duty. His wars were their sacrifices. A single proclamation could change the course of thousands of lives. And yet, despite the hardships, many believed in him fully. They saw kings who expanded borders, built reservoirs that fed millions, and raised cities that touched the sky. When the king succeeded, the land flourished. When he prayed, rains came. When he conquered, the empire grew. The myth of divine right didn't just fuel power, it gave hope. But beneath this hope simmered fear. The fear that the divine king was still human, still fragile, still mortal, and that the entire world they built depended on the choices of one man. That fear grew strongest during moments of crisis. When drought struck in the late 11th century, many whispered that the king had lost the gods' favor. When the Cham invaded in 1177 and stormed Angkor, survivors questioned whether divine protection had failed altogether. In those moments, the Divaraja cult revealed its darker side. It demanded a new king, one who would restore balance, restore faith, and restore glory. And so, one reign after another, Khmer rulers risked everything. Their victories became legend. Their failures became excuses for assassination. Divine authority gave them absolute power, but it also painted targets on their backs. Still, the illusion of divinity endured, because the Khmer were not simply building temples for the present. They were building eternity. Every tower rising into the sky was a declaration. The king will be remembered. The king will live beyond death. By carving themselves into stone, by aligning temples with astronomical precision, by embedding their faces into entire walls, the rulers of Angkor ensured that their legacy outlived their bones. And centuries later, standing before the silent temples of Cambodia, it's hard not to feel the presence they chased. The grandeur, the ambition, the belief that stone could hold the memory of a god. But divine power is a dangerous dream, and for the Khmer kings, it was both their greatest strength and their deepest downfall, because the more they claimed immortality, the more devastating their human weaknesses became. And soon, the empire would learn that even the god kings of Angkor could bleed. If you want to understand how the Khmer Empire became one of the greatest civilizations in world history, you cannot begin with kings, temples, or armies. You must begin with water. Because long before Angkor Wat became a symbol of divine kingship, long before the empire stretched across Southeast Asia, and long before its rulers crowned themselves as living gods, the Khmer built something far more extraordinary. They built a world controlled by human hands, a world in which rivers were redirected, lakes were reshaped, and entire seasons were tamed, a world where water, unpredictable, destructive, life-giving, became a tool of power. It is easy to imagine the Khmer Empire through its temples, their towers rising above the trees, their carvings glowing under the morning sun. But those temples were not the reason the empire survived. They were the result, the product of something deeper, something practical, something brilliant. Hidden beneath the surface of the sprawling jungle lies the true magic of Angkor, a complex hydraulic system so advanced that modern engineers still struggle to explain parts of it. To appreciate its genius, you first need to understand Cambodia's geography. The land is shaped by two forces, the Mekong River and the monsoon rains. Half the year, the land floods. The other half, it dries into cracked earth. For most ancient societies, this harsh cycle was a curse. But for the Khmer, it was an opportunity. Instead of surrendering to nature, they redesigned it, and their tool was the bari, a man-made reservoir, so massive that it looked like an inland sea. Construction of the earliest baris began in the 9th century. Jayavarman II may have created divine kingship, but it was the engineers behind him who laid the foundation of an empire. Across the flat plains of Angkor, workers dug enormous basins, some stretching 8 kilometers long and more than 2 kilometers wide. They shaped them with geometric precision, perfectly aligned with the cardinal directions. These reservoirs were more than water storage, they were statements of power, proof that the king controlled the forces of nature. But storage alone wasn't enough. The Khmer needed a way to move water across vast distances, and so they built canals, hundreds of them, forming a network that connected every village, every city, every rice field. Water flowed like blood through a living body, pumped and directed with astonishing accuracy. During the monsoon, the canals prevented catastrophic flooding. During the dry season, they carried life to the farthest fields. The result was a system that could yield 3 or even 4 rice harvests per year, feeding a population of nearly 1 million people, more than the population of London, Paris and Rome combined during the same period. Imagine the sight: a landscape shimmering with reservoirs, canals threading across the horizon, rice paddies glowing green under the morning light, farmers walking barefoot through mud that had been softened by the engineered flow of the monsoon, boats gliding through channels that connected temples, markets and neighborhoods. This was not merely infrastructure, it was a living machine, a machine that sustained power, wealth and ambition. By the time Suryavarman II ascended the throne in 1113, the hydraulic system reached its peak. His reign saw the construction of the West Beray and the West Meben Shrine, works so massive that their full design can only be appreciated from the sky. Every inch of the empire, every canal, every outlet channel, every embankment functioned with a purpose. Engineers calculated angles so precise that water could move at controlled speeds across kilometers. They used clay, laterite and sandstone to strengthen banks, allowing structures to withstand the weight of millions of tons of water. In some places, they built underground channels and stone aqueducts, invisible to the naked eye, but essential to balancing the system. And why did they do this? Because water was power. The king who controlled water controlled the rice. The king who controlled rice controlled the population. The king who controlled the population controlled the kingdom. This mastery over water also had a spiritual dimension. In Khmer cosmology, the universe was shaped by Mount Meru, the sacred mountain that stood at the center of all creation. Around it flowed oceans, rivers, and cosmic waters. By building baris surrounding temples, the Khmer symbolically recreated the universe, placing the king at its center. From the aerial view, Angkor was not just a city. It was a map of the heavens, a divine blueprint etched into the land. Yet, this extraordinary achievement carried hidden weaknesses. The system was delicate. If one canal clogged, the pressure shifted. If a reservoir cracked, water escaped uncontrollably. If monsoon patterns changed, the entire balance collapsed. And as centuries passed, that is exactly what happened. Sediment filled the canals, forests were cleared too aggressively, causing soil erosion. The monsoons became unpredictable. Slowly, the machine that once sustained the empire began working against it. By the late 13th century, travelers from China recorded signs of decline. Roads were cracked, canals ran shallow, barais that once shimmered like mirrors now looked like marshes. And when a prolonged drought struck in the 14th century, followed by devastating floods, the Khmer hydraulic system, once the marvel of Southeast Asia, could no longer cope. Without water control, rice yields crashed. Without rice, the population fell. And without people, the temples could not be maintained. The empire began to shrink. Not because of a single battle, not because of a foreign invasion, but because the one thing the Khmer thought they mastered, nature, refused to stay controlled. Today, the remnants of this engineering masterpiece remain faintly visible. Ancient canals appear as subtle lines in the earth when viewed from satellite images. Reservoirs now covered with vegetation still hold the shape of perfect rectangles, and beneath the forest floor lies the skeleton of a lost hydraulic empire that once fed millions and supported the greatest city on earth. The Khmer kings built their legacy in stone, but the engineers built theirs in water, and though water helped create the greatest power in Southeast Asia, it also carried within it the seeds of the empire's collapse. To understand the height of Khmer power, you must understand the man who stood at its center, a king whose ambition carved itself into stone, a ruler whose name became inseparable from one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. A monarch, both feared and worshipped. His name was Suryavarman II, and his story begins long before Angkor Wat rises from the ground like a mountain of carved light. The story begins with violence. In the early 12th century, the Khmer Empire is fractured. Rival princes claim the throne. Provinces rebel. Generals switch loyalties. Court officials whisper in hidden chambers. It is a time when kings do not die peacefully in their beds. They are overthrown, poisoned, or cut down by enemies wearing their own colors. Into this chaos steps a young prince with sharp instincts and a sharper will. Suryavarman is not the heir. He has no uncontested right to rule. What he does have is conviction, an almost frightening level of certainty that he is destined to become king. And in a world where ambition decides fate, conviction is enough to start a war. We know little about his early life, but inscriptions speak of battles fought, alliances formed, and rivals crushed. One inscription describes him riding an elephant as one rides a storm, a metaphor that reveals everything. Suryavarman is not a negotiator. He is a conqueror. His rise to power is not delicate. It is forged through blood. By around 1113, he seizes the throne, ending the years of instability. But he does not want to simply rule. He wants to be remembered. From the first year of his reign, he begins reshaping the empire. He reorganizes the provincial network, strengthens borders, and expands the bureaucracy. He builds roads that connect distant territories. He forms alliances with neighboring kingdoms, while preparing armies to subdue those who refuse his diplomacy. Under his rule, Angkor becomes more than a capital. It becomes a vision of order, wealth, and cosmic authority. But his greatest vision is something far more daring, a temple unlike anything the world has ever seen. A structure so vast and so perfect that even centuries later scholars remain stunned by its precision. He calls it Angkor Wat. It is difficult to imagine the moment Suryavarman first conceived of it. Did he stand before the flat plains of Angkor and see a temple rising like the mythical Mount Meru? Did he picture towers reaching toward the sky, surrounded by moats that mirrored the cosmic ocean? Or did the idea come to him gradually, born from his belief in divine kingship? We may never know. But what we do know is this. Angkor Wat is not built to be merely a temple. It is built to be a statement, a declaration, a monument to immortality. Construction begins during his early reign. Tens of thousands of workers are mobilized. Stone is quarried from mountains more than 50 kilometers away. It is dragged on rafts, floated down rivers, hauled on wooden sledges, lifted on bamboo scaffolding. Every block weighs hundreds of kilograms. Every surface must be carved. Every carving must be flawless. The moat surrounding the temple stretches nearly 200 meters wide and forms a perfect rectangle. The central tower rises more than 60 meters high, symbolizing Mount Meru, the home of the gods. But what makes Angkor Wat extraordinary is not just its scale, it is the intention behind it. The temple is dedicated to Vishnu, the protector and preserver. This choice is unusual. Most Khmer kings associate themselves with Shiva, but Suryavarman chooses Vishnu, aligning himself with cosmic protection, transcendence, and divine legitimacy. It is a message written in stone. He is not a temporary ruler. He is the central axis of the universe. The bas-reliefs carved along the temple walls tell stories from Hindu mythology, battles between demons and gods, celestial dances, epic narratives from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, But among these divine scenes is something rare, a depiction of Suryavarman himself. He is shown seated on a throne, surrounded by attendants, holding a sacred parasol. Soldiers, generals, advisors, all appear around him with folded hands. This is not art. This is propaganda. A permanent reminder that Suryavarman is the earthly manifestation of cosmic order. Yet, even as the temple grows in beauty, the empire grows in tension. Building something of this magnitude requires more than vision. It requires control. Enormous resources must be collected. Thousands of farmers are redirected to labor. Nobles must obey. Officials must remain loyal. Any rebellion, even the smallest, could disrupt the entire project. So Suryavarman rules with an iron will. Inscriptions reveal the scale of his authority. Taxes increase. Labor demands intensify. Territorial expansion becomes relentless. He wages campaigns against neighboring kingdoms, especially in present-day Thailand and Vietnam. Some battles end in victory. Others end in stalemate. But every battle reinforces his identity as a warrior king. Foreign nations notice this rising power. Records from China describe Khmer ambassadors arriving with gifts, seeking recognition, influence, and trade. These accounts praise the wealth of Angkor, the size of its cities, and the complexity of its water systems. From afar, Suryavarman appears unstoppable, and yet, within the heart of the empire, cracks are beginning to form, because the greatest monuments often hide the greatest burdens. The hydraulic system that sustains Angkor is already showing signs of strain. Sediment builds in the canals. The bowries require constant maintenance, and as the population grows, so do demands on food and water. The empire's stability rests on perfect environmental balance, a balance that is becoming increasingly fragile. While Suryavarman builds a temple for the gods, the land beneath his feet begins shifting in ways no king can fully control. Still, he presses forward. By the time the final carvings are being completed, Suryavarman's health is failing. He does not live long enough to see Angkor Wat fully finished. Some scholars believe he dies around 1150. Others place his death slightly later. The exact year may never be known, but the legacy he leaves behind is unmistakable. Angkor Wat stands as his eternal monument, a temple so perfectly aligned with the sun that on the spring equinox, its towers cradle the rising light like a crown of fire. But monuments cannot protect kingdoms. And soon after his death, the empire spirals into conflict again. Rival factions compete for the throne. Foreign enemies take advantage of the instability, and the delicate infrastructure begins to break under the pressure. Suryavarman II built Angkor Wat to symbolize divine permanence. Yet the empire he ruled is anything but permanent. The seeds of its collapse are already sown, and the next chapter will show how a new king, driven by desperation and devotion, attempts to save what remains. Stand before Angkor Wat at dawn, and you feel time pause. The sky glows purple and gold. The towers rise like the spine of a stone dragon. Shadows stretch across the moat as still as glass, and for a moment you understand why people across centuries have called this place impossible. Not because humans couldn't build it, but because no one can fully explain how they did. Angkor Wat is not just a temple, it is a riddle carved into the earth, a structure so vast, so mathematically precise, so spiritually layered, that even today, engineers, archaeologists, and astronomers struggle to decode its secrets, and the more you learn, the more unreal it becomes. Start with the scale. The temple covers more than 400 acres, larger than the walled city of Constantinople, larger than the Vatican, larger than most modern universities. Its moat is 200 meters wide and nearly 6 kilometers around. This is not symbolic architecture. This is an engineered ocean carved by hand. Imagine thousands of workers using only chisels and wooden tools, digging a moat the length of a marathon. Imagine the precision required to align every side at perfect right angles to create a boundary so balanced that modern laser instruments show almost no deviation. It should not be possible, yet there it stands. Cross the causeway and the mystery deepens. The structure aligns with the sun so precisely that during the equinox, the sun rises directly behind the central tower. Light pours through the temple like a river of gold, illuminating statue after statue in perfect sequence. This isn't coincidence, it is cosmic engineering. The temple is a map of the universe, a three-dimensional mandala, a symbolic recreation of Mount Meru, the sacred mountain of Hindu cosmology. But this raises the question, how did the Khmer know? How did they achieve this astronomical accuracy without modern math, without telescopes, without navigational tools? Some believe they used shadow tracking techniques. Others think they built temporary wooden towers to chart the sun's movement year after year. Yet even these explanations feel small compared to the monument itself. The bas-reliefs stretch almost a kilometer, the longest continuous carved narrative in the world. Every centimeter carved by hand. Scenes from the churning of the ocean, armies marching into battle, celestial dancers with perfect posture and impossible grace. You see horses, elephants, chariots, warriors, demons. You see gods emerging from swirling waves. Every line, every fold of cloth, every strand of hair carved with a craftsman's obsession. This is not decoration. This is storytelling. A mythic universe unfolding in stone, but look closer, truly closer. You begin noticing patterns, ratios, recurring measurements, hidden mathematics woven into art. One study found that the temple's proportions reflect the solar calendar. Another discovered that the central sanctuary's dimensions match the numbers in ancient Hindu cosmology, 4,320,000, the number of years in a cosmic cycle. Did Khmer architects understand these cosmic numbers? Or did they follow traditions so ancient, so deeply rooted, that even they didn't know they were encoding astronomical knowledge into their work? The structure is made from sandstone blocks, weighing up to 3,000 kilograms each. Many were quarried from Phnom Kulen, 50 kilometers away. How did they transport these stones across rivers and swamps? Theories include bamboo rafts, sand-lubricated sledges, elephants dragging stone rollers, but none fully explain the scale. None explain how the blocks were lifted to heights of 60 meters. None explain how joints remain so tightly fitted that even a sheet of paper cannot slide between them. There are no mistakes, no uneven walls, no misaligned corridors. Angkor Wat is so precise that some researchers have compared its planning to modern computer modeling. And yet the Khmer built it 900 years ago, using nothing but human labor and human genius. But for all its beauty, Angkor Wat hides something darker. Its perfection carries the weight of thousands of lives. Workers spent decades carving stone until their hands bled. Laborers died hauling blocks through flooded fields. The king demanded devotion not only from his subjects but from their bodies. Angkor Wat is both a masterpiece and a monument to sacrifice. And then there is the mystery of its orientation. Most Khmer temples face east. They welcome the rising sun. But Angkor Wat faces west, the direction associated with death. Some say the temple was intended as Suryavarman II's funerary monument. Others argue that Vishnu, the god to whom the temple is dedicated, is linked to the west, making the alignment symbolic. But there is another possibility. A possibility whispered among scholars, that Angkor Wat was not designed to honor life or death alone, but to mirror the heavens themselves, an earthly reflection of the starry realm above. Some believe the 5 towers represent the constellation Draco. Others argue they map Orion. A few even suggest that Angkor Wat was aligned with lunar cycles in ways that match ancient Indian astronomical texts. And while these theories remain debated, one truth is unquestionable. Angkor Wat was designed with knowledge far deeper than simple architecture. It is a cosmic instrument carved into stone. But despite its grandeur, despite its perfection, the temple could not save the empire. After Suryavarman's death, the kingdom spiraled into conflict. Rivals claimed the throne. Foreign enemies struck its borders. The hydraulic system began to fail, and Angkor Wat, once the center of divine kingship, slowly transformed from a living temple into a silent monument. For centuries, it stood alone in the jungle, wrapped in vines, guarded by the shadows of banyan trees. Yet even in abandonment, it never lost its power. Travelers who stumbled upon it were stunned into silence. Explorers wrote of its beauty with trembling hands, and modern visitors still describe the same feeling. The sense that this place is too perfect, too vast, too deliberate to belong to the human world alone. Angkor Wat is not just a temple, it is a question, a challenge carved into stone, a reminder that some achievements are so extraordinary they defy explanation. And at the heart of this temple stands a king whose ambition reshaped the world. But ambition alone cannot sustain an empire, and in the next chapter, the walls of the royal court begin to shake under the weight of betrayal, rivalry, and the relentless hunger for power. They thought Kush would fade. They thought a kingdom pushed into the desert would crumble. They thought the sands would swallow its cities. They were wrong. Because here, far from the Nile's familiar curve, a new power erupted. A city of smoke, a city of fire, a city whose furnaces glowed so fiercely that ancient writers claimed its night skies turned red. This was Meroe, the beating iron heart of the Kushite world, and its rise would shock every empire that underestimated it. The transition from Napata to Meroe was not a gentle shift. It was a survival strategy forced by danger. Egypt, once conquered by Kush, now lay under new rulers. The Ptolemies, Greek kings hungry for dominance, threatened the southern frontier. Kush needed distance, defense, and a fresh center of gravity. So the Kushite throne moved south, deeper into Africa, into a land rich with forests, gold, stone, and iron. Meroe had everything a rising superpower required, and the kings and queens of Kush would waste no time reshaping history from their new capital. The landscape around Meroe told its own story. Unlike the dry cliffs of Napata, Meroe's surroundings burst with vegetation and resources. Herds grazed, forests provided endless fuel, and beneath the soil lay the secret that would define the kingdom. Vast deposits of high-quality iron ore. The Kushites understood its value. They understood its power. They understood that whoever controlled iron controlled war, trade, and influence. So they turned Meroe into the most advanced iron production center in the ancient world. Day and night, furnaces roared, blacksmiths hammered metal that could slice, pierce, and shape empires. Smoke curled into the sky like columns rising from a cathedral of industry, and the people who lived within that heat, noise, and fire developed technologies no other African kingdom possessed at the time. From tools to weapons to agricultural equipment, Kush transformed iron into opportunity. In a world still dominated by bronze, Merowe was a revolution. But this golden age wasn't built on iron alone. It was built on something rarer, something unexpected, something that shocked outsiders who believed power belonged only to kings. Merowe was ruled again and again by queens. They were called kandekes, warrior queens, political titans, monarchs feared in Rome, respected in Africa, and immortalized in carvings that show them towering over vanquished enemies. The kandekes of Kush were not symbolic rulers. They led armies, they negotiated treaties, they commanded palaces. They stamped their names on monuments and sealed their legacies in stone. Among them, one queen stands above all, Amanirenas, a woman who dared to challenge the greatest empire on earth, a woman who refused to bow to Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and a woman whose defiance shaped the identity of Kush for centuries. The conflict began with arrogance. Rome believed that conquering Egypt meant inheriting control of everything further south. They miscalculated. When Roman tax collectors marched into Kushite territory demanding tribute, the response was swift and brutal. Amanirenas struck back. Her forces stormed Roman outposts. Statues of Augustus were torn down. The head of one was brought to Kush, buried beneath a temple staircase, so worshippers would walk on Rome's emperor every day. It was a message written in stone. Kush bows to no one. Rome, humiliated, retaliated, and for a brief moment it looked as if the empire might crush Kush once and for all. But the desert favored the Kushites. Their archers, renowned across the ancient world for accuracy so precise they were called the eyes of the king, broke Roman formations again and again. The war dragged on until both sides realized something extraordinary. Neither could defeat the other. What followed was one of the most remarkable treaties of the ancient world. Rome agreed to withdraw, to abandon its forts, to recognize Kushite control over disputed territory. And most shocking of all, Kush paid no tribute. Rome respected them. Rarely did Augustus accept stalemate, but faced with Amanirenas, he found an equal. This diplomatic victory ignited a new chapter for Merowe. Trade routes expanded. Art flourished. Temples multiplied. The pyramids of Merowe, smaller, steeper, and more numerous than those of Egypt, rose by the hundreds. Each one housed a ruler, a queen, a prince, each one a testament to a civilization that refused to be erased. Inside the palaces of Merowe, ideas collided. Kushite religion blended with Egyptian traditions, yet it remained distinctly African. The lion-headed god, Apedemak, fierce, divine, and unique to Nubia, became a symbol of strength and independence. Temples dedicated to him contain intricate carvings of royalty wielding power with confidence, depictions of queens with daggers, kings with bows, bodies adorned with jewelry and regalia that reflected both African heritage and Kush's international connections. And it was not only politics and religion that flourished. Writing advanced. The Kushites developed their own script, Meroitic, one of the earliest written African languages. Scholars still puzzle over parts of it today. It is a reminder that entire chapters of African history remain hidden, waiting to be understood, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be restored. But beneath the glory lay challenges that even the Iron City could not escape. Environmental pressure grew. Deforestation from centuries of iron production began to scar the land. Trade routes shifted as foreign empires rose and fell. Internal rivalries weakened the royal court. And somewhere around the 4th century CE, Merowe began to fracture. Its pyramids remained. Its legends endured. but the political heart of Kush slowly stopped beating. Yet the story of Meroe is not one of defeat. It is one of resilience, innovation, fierce independence, and cultural sovereignty in a world dominated by larger empires. Its queens carved their power into world history. Its iron reshaped economies. Its symbolism influenced African kingdoms for centuries, and its ruins, still standing, still proud, still defiant, tell the story of a civilization the world tried to forget, but could never truly erase. Because Meroe was more than a capital. It was proof that African empires were not shadows of others. They were creators, innovators, leaders, builders of identity and power on their own terms. And in the heart of the desert, where blackened slag piles still mark ancient furnaces, the whispers of Kushite ironworkers still rise with the wind. A reminder that fire builds more than weapons. It builds civilizations. They never expected women to rule. They never imagined women commanding armies. They certainly never believed women could defy the greatest powers on earth. But in Kush, the unexpected was ordinary. And in the deserts of ancient Nubia, queens didn't just wear crowns, they carried kingdoms on their shoulders. The world calls them Kandakis, warrior queens, mothers of nations, defenders of borders. But their story begins with a simple truth. In Kush, power did not belong to a single gender. It belonged to those strong enough to claim it. And the Kandakis claimed it with fire. Imagine a queen riding into battle, not hidden in a carriage, not guarded behind soldiers, leading, visible, fearless. This was Amanarrenas, the most formidable queen Kush would ever produce. Her rise shocks historians even today, because she didn't simply rule, she reshaped the identity of her kingdom. Her defining moment came when Rome crossed a line. The empire had conquered Egypt, and believed Kush would kneel next. They sent tax collectors south, expecting obedience. What they found instead was fury. Amanarrenas struck first. Her armies raided Roman settlements, crushed garrisons, and returned with trophies, including the severed head of Augustus's statue. That head was buried beneath a temple so the people of Kush would walk over Rome's emperor every day. A message so bold, even Rome had no choice but to acknowledge it. When Augustus retaliated, the world braced for Kush's destruction. Rome was unstoppable. Rome was merciless, but Rome had never fought warriors like these. Kushite archers, legendary for precision, shattered Roman formations. Their arrows could blind a soldier at 50 paces. Their tactics confused the invaders, and their queen, even after losing an eye in battle, refused to yield. The desert became Kush's greatest ally. Roman troops, unprepared for the blistering heat and shifting sands, faltered. Amanarrenas pressed harder. Again and again, she proved that empires fall when they underestimate those they invade. The war reached a stalemate, but the treaty that followed wasn't a compromise, it was a victory. Rome withdrew. Kush paid no tribute. The emperor of the world's most powerful empire accepted peace terms dictated by a one-eyed queen from Africa. No other African kingdom ever forced Rome into such an agreement. But Amanarrenas wasn't the only queen who rewrote history. Amanishak, too, ruled with wealth and authority that still astonishes archaeologists. Her treasures, gold, jewelry, intricate carvings, reveal a ruler who blended beauty with power. She commissioned massive temples and expanded Kush's cultural influence. Her stolen artifacts, scattered around European museums today, remain some of the finest pieces of ancient African art ever discovered. These queens were not exceptions. They were a tradition, a political institution. When a Kandake ruled, she ruled fully, issuing commands, leading armies, conducting diplomacy, and shaping state policy. Their images show them towering over prisoners, spears in hand, claiming dominance with confidence carved in stone. This system terrified outsiders. Greek and Roman writers struggled to comprehend a kingdom where queens held such authority. To them, it flipped the natural order. To Kush, it was the natural order. Under the Kandakes, art flourished, temples multiplied, trade expanded, and diplomacy evolved into an art form. The queens of Kush navigated alliances with Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean world. They protected their borders fiercely, yet opened their markets strategically. Their leadership style blended strength with calculated restraint. They did not seek war, but they never avoided it. The legacy of these queens survives in carvings, pyramids, inscriptions, and oral traditions passed through centuries. Their stories endure because they defied conventions that even modern societies struggle with. They proved that leadership has no gender, that courage is universal, and that power belongs to those who seize it. Today, the ruins of Kush still echo with their footsteps. The sands of Nubia still guard their pyramids, and their legend continues to rise, defying the erasure of African empires from global history. In the heart of ancient Africa, Kush was not just a kingdom of warriors and queens, it was a kingdom of commerce. Its wealth was legendary, whispered across deserts and oceans. Gold flowed from its mines, like lifeblood, ivory and exotic goods traveled down the Nile, and iron from Meroe fueled not only weapons, but influence. Kush's power was built on the ability to connect, to trade, and to turn resources into dominance. Merchants from as far as India and the Arabian Peninsula sought Kushite gold. Ships navigated the Nile, carrying luxury goods, rare animals, and skilled artisans. The kingdom's economy was sophisticated. They didn't simply gather resources, they controlled supply, established trade routes, and leveraged their riches to cement alliances. Each transaction wasn't merely economic, it was political. Every shipment of gold or ivory strengthened Kush's position in a world dominated by empires that underestimated African power. The city of Meroe itself was a hub. Markets buzzed with life. Artisans carved intricate jewelry from gold and bronze. Weavers produced textiles that rivaled Egyptian fabrics. Potters shaped clay into vessels that carried both utilitarian and symbolic value. Merchants negotiated deals in languages spanning 3 continents, and couriers delivered messages that ensured trade agreements were enforced across vast distances. But Kushite trade wasn't limited to luxury goods. Iron smelting from Meroe's furnaces powered armies and tools alike. The quality of the metal made Kushite weapons highly coveted. Spears, swords, and arrowheads shaped from this iron became symbols of both practical skill and technological mastery. An enemy facing Kushite iron knew they were confronting not only superior weaponry, but a society capable of sustaining long-term warfare and production. The wealth of Kush also funded monumental architecture. Pyramids in Meroe, temples dedicated to Apedemek, and palaces for the kings and queens were financed by these trade networks. They were statements of power meant to impress allies and intimidate foes. Kush was demonstrating that wealth was not just a number, it was influence, culture, and authority made visible. Trade routes weren't just economic arteries, they were lifelines of diplomacy. Kush maintained relationships with Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, and even distant Mediterranean powers. These networks allowed them to gather intelligence, anticipate threats, and extend influence far beyond their borders. Kush's rulers understood that control of trade was equivalent to control of destiny. They turned resources into leverage, alliances, and political clout that kept empires at bay, but wealth also attracted envy. Foreign powers eyed Kush with greed, and internal factions competed for access to these riches. The empire's prosperity made it a target, forcing rulers to balance generosity with defense, diplomacy with aggression. Every gold shipment, every trade agreement, every exported iron tool was a strategic decision that could tip the balance of power. By the time the Roman Empire reached its peak, Kush had already established itself as a kingdom that commanded respect. Its wealth, derived from natural resources, technological skill, and strategic trade, made it a civilization that could negotiate from strength. Roman generals might have seen Nubia as distant or peripheral, but Kush's influence and wealth ensured that outsiders approached with caution, diplomacy, and sometimes fear. Kush's prosperity also shaped society internally. Resources funded education, religious institutions, and artistic expression. Wealth allowed the queens and kings to patronize artisans, ensuring that culture flourished alongside military might. The combination of material wealth and cultural investment made Kush a civilization whose legacy outlived political decline. The pyramids, temples, and artifacts were not just symbols of power, they were a message for generations. A society that understood the value of wealth, trade, and influence could thrive in even the harshest environments. And yet, despite the grandeur of trade and gold, the kingdom's power remained fragile. Environmental changes, overexploitation of resources, and shifting trade routes eventually weakened Kush. But its story endures as proof that economic foresight and control of resources can elevate a civilization to heights that rival empires, leaving a mark on history that refuses to be erased. In Kush, power was never purely political, it was spiritual. The kings, queens, and people understood that legitimacy came not only from armies or wealth, but from the gods. Religion was the heartbeat of the empire, guiding decisions, shaping society, and reinforcing authority. It was a force that could unify the kingdom or justify war, a tool wielded by rulers to ensure loyalty and maintain control over vast lands and diverse peoples. Central to Kushite spirituality was a fusion of Egyptian and indigenous beliefs. The kingdom revered gods, like Amun, imported from the north, but also celebrated local deities such as Apademak, the lion-headed god of war and protection. Apademak was more than a divine figure. He was a symbol of sovereignty, courage, and resilience. Temples dedicated to him show kings and queens standing in his presence, often armed and victorious, emphasizing the idea that divine favor was inseparable from military success. Rituals in Kush were elaborate and public, designed to impress both citizens and foreign visitors. Kings and queens performed ceremonies to bless harvests, ensure fertility, or celebrate military victories. Priests, adorned in intricate robes, conducted sacrifices and prayers with exacting precision. Every act reinforced the notion that the rulers were chosen by the gods and that the kingdom itself existed under divine protection. One of the most remarkable aspects of Kushite religion was the role of women, particularly the Khmerkings, in spiritual life. These queens often acted as high priestesses, leading ceremonies and rituals that blended governance with devotion. Their participation in religious life reinforced their authority. They were not only rulers on the battlefield or in court, they were intermediaries between the divine and their people, embodying both political and spiritual power. Rituals were not confined to temples. Pyramids, monuments, and sacred lakes also served spiritual purposes. The construction of pyramids, with their steep angles and grandiose design, symbolized the ascension of rulers to the afterlife and ensured their continued protection over the living kingdom. Sacred lakes and canals mirrored these celestial ideals, linking earthly infrastructure to the cosmos. Water, already central to Kush's economy, became sacred as well, symbolizing life, abundance, and divine favor. Religion also influenced diplomacy and war. Before major campaigns, rulers would consult oracles, perform sacrifices, or seek omens to ensure divine support. Victories were attributed to the gods, and defeats often to the displeasure of divine forces. This created a culture where the spiritual and the temporal were inseparable. Political decisions were justified through ritual and divine mandate, making rebellion not just illegal, but sacrilegious. For the common people, religion was a source of structure and identity. Festivals, processions, and daily offerings reinforced social cohesion. Artisans, farmers, and merchants all participated in rituals, connecting their work and lives to the spiritual well-being of the kingdom. Religion provided a moral framework, cultural continuity, and a sense of purpose, binding the empire together in ways armies and wealth alone could not. But religious devotion also demanded sacrifice. Large-scale temple constructions, offerings, and labor-intensive rituals required the participation of the entire population. While these acts reinforced loyalty, they also tested resilience. The empire's reliance on divine favor was a double-edged sword. A king or queen's failure to maintain religious legitimacy could spark unrest, weaken authority, and invite internal or external threats. In essence, religion in Kush was both foundation and force multiplier. It legitimized rulers, strengthened armies, inspired artistic achievements, and bound people across regions. It elevated kings and queens into semi-divine figures and ensured that the empire's influence extended far beyond mere territory. Through worship, ritual, and spiritual symbolism, Kush created a civilization whose identity, power, and legacy were inseparable from the divine. Power in Kush was never granted. It was seized, defended, and constantly proven on the battlefield. The empire's strength rested not only on wealth or spiritual authority, but on its ability to fight and win wars that would intimidate neighbors and preserve sovereignty. Kush's military was disciplined, innovative, and deadly, a force that earned respect from empires like Rome and Egypt. Kushite armies were highly organized. Infantry formed the backbone, armed with spears, bows, and shields, forged from the kingdom's own iron. Archers were especially feared. Some historical accounts describe their accuracy as unmatched, capable of striking down enemies from surprising distances. Cavalry units rode nimble horses bred in Nubia, providing mobility across the harsh desert and savanna terrain. Chariots, while less prominent than in Egypt, were deployed strategically, often combined with infantry and archers to create versatile combat formations. But the crown jewel of Kushite military innovation was iron. Meroe's furnaces produced weapons that were stronger and more reliable than bronze counterparts used by neighboring states. Spears, swords, and arrowheads allowed Kush to dominate regional conflicts, defend trade routes, and intimidate potential invaders. Iron production wasn't merely practical, it was a strategic advantage that few could match in Africa or the Mediterranean world. The Kandakes, queen rulers of Kush, often commanded these armies personally. Amina-Renas, the one-eyed warrior queen, became legendary after leading a successful campaign against Roman forces encroaching from Egypt. Her strategy was precise, her forces disciplined, and her leadership inspirational. Roman soldiers, unaccustomed to facing a woman in command with such authority and effectiveness, reportedly approached battles with caution and awe. Her victories proved that Kushite power was not just in numbers or arms, but in leadership, courage, and psychological warfare. Conflict was not always against distant empires. Internal rebellions and rival tribes also tested the kingdom's might. Kushite rulers understood that loyalty had to be enforced, often through both negotiation and force. Campaigns were swift, decisive, and symbolic. Triumphs were commemorated through monuments, inscriptions, and religious ceremonies, reinforcing the idea that military success was divinely sanctioned. The geography of Kush also played a critical role in its military strategy. The Nile provided a natural defense barrier, while the surrounding deserts and forests offered concealment and strategic advantages against invading forces. Kushite generals exploited these terrains expertly, turning potential disadvantages into strategic strength. Knowledge of the land allowed smaller armies to defeat larger, better-equipped forces. Trade, too, intersected with warfare. Controlling trade routes was essential for funding armies and sustaining campaigns. Kushite forces protected caravan paths, ensured safe passage for merchants, and, when necessary, launched raids to secure resources. Military might was directly tied to economic power, making the army both a shield and a lever for expansion. Despite their successes, Kushite armies faced challenges. The rise of new empires, changes in trade routes, and environmental pressures sometimes stretched resources thin. Yet the empire's military ethos endured. Kushites valued discipline, ingenuity, and adaptability. Even in times of decline, their martial traditions influenced neighboring African societies and left a lasting legacy. Ultimately, the Kushite military was not about conquest alone. It was a statement of sovereignty, a demonstration of divine favor, and a means to protect the economic and spiritual foundations of the kingdom. In every battle, the army carried the weight of culture, faith, and identity, and through centuries of warfare, these forces ensured that Kush remained a power no empire could ignore. Behind the grandeur of Kush's pyramids, temples, and armies lay a world of ambition, betrayal, and relentless political maneuvering. The throne was never guaranteed, and the corridors of power were filled with whispers, conspiracies, and constant tests of loyalty. To rule Kush was to navigate not only external threats, but the volatile ambitions of family, generals, and courtiers. Succession in Kush was not always linear. While Kandaki's queen mothers and warrior queens often held ultimate authority, rival princes and nobles frequently challenged their legitimacy. Court records, inscriptions, and pyramidal tombs hint at a culture where alliances were as crucial as strength, and betrayal could erupt at any moment. Political survival demanded cunning, foresight, and sometimes ruthless decisiveness. One of the most compelling examples of court intrigue involves the transition of power following Seaspika, one of Kush's notable kings. Inscriptions suggest that multiple factions vied for influence, manipulating religious ceremonies, military deployments, and marriage alliances to secure favor. These conflicts weren't always violent, but subtle acts of sabotage, strategic marriages, and calculated alliances could decide the fate of the kingdom. A poorly timed alliance or a single disloyal general could spark chaos. Kandakes often played dual roles as both military leaders and political strategists. They had to assert authority over generals, maintain loyalty among nobles, and negotiate with foreign powers, all while presenting themselves as divinely sanctioned rulers. The Manarinas, for example, not only commanded armies against Rome, but also secured support from internal factions to maintain her rule. Her ability to balance diplomacy, warfare, and domestic governance was key to Kush's survival. Religion was also weaponized in the power struggle. Temples and priesthoods acted as political hubs, capable of swaying public perception and legitimizing rulers. Control over religious ceremonies meant influence over both commoners and elite officials. Those who mastered this intersection of faith and politics could manipulate rivals, enforce loyalty, and silence dissent. Kings and queens who neglected this aspect of governance risked losing authority, even if their military strength was unmatched. Marriage and family ties were equally crucial. Strategic unions were arranged to consolidate power or forge alliances between rival factions. These marriages were not merely social, they were political tools that could shift the balance of influence in the court. Generational power struggles meant that family could be both ally and threat, requiring rulers to navigate relationships with constant vigilance. Assassination, while rare, was a real threat. Historical records suggest that poisoning ambushes and orchestrated accidents were tools in the arsenal of ambitious courtiers. Kings and queens maintained personal guards and spies to detect plots before they escalated. In Kush, survival depended on intelligence as much as physical strength. The palace was a chessboard where every move could determine life, death, or exile. Yet amidst this turbulence, the Kushite court thrived culturally and administratively. Artisans, scribes, and architects worked under royal patronage. Laws were codified, trade agreements enforced, and religious rituals meticulously maintained. The palace was both a center of intrigue and a hub of civilization, demonstrating that even in politically unstable environments, societies could achieve remarkable cultural and technological feats. Ultimately, the court of Kush illustrates that power was never absolute. Authority had to be constantly earned, defended, and performed. Kings and queens were not merely rulers, they were strategists, diplomats, military leaders, and spiritual figures all at once, and their success depended on understanding that the greatest battles were often fought not on the battlefield but in the halls of power, where ambition, loyalty, and cunning determined the fate of an empire. Step into the ruins of Meroe today, and it is impossible not to feel the magnitude of Kushite ambition. The pyramids rise steep and narrow against the desert sky, monuments not just to rulers, but to a civilization that mastered engineering, architecture, and innovation long before many neighboring empires could. To understand Kush's power, one must understand how it shaped the world, not just with armies or gold, but with ingenuity carved into stone. Kushite architecture is at first striking for its distinctiveness. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, the Kushite pyramids are smaller, steeper, and far more numerous. Each one marks the resting place of a king or queen. But together they create a sprawling necropolis that dominates the landscape. The pyramid's angle is intentionally sharp, designed to convey ascension toward the heavens, and to demonstrate the divine authority of the ruler buried within. These structures are engineering marvels, requiring precise measurements, skilled labor, and deep knowledge of materials and forces. The construction methods themselves were impressive. Stones were quarried from nearby deposits, carefully cut and fitted with such precision that mortar was often unnecessary. Laborers transported massive blocks using ramps, levers, and sledges. Unlike Egypt, where pyramids were singular monumental efforts, Kush created dozens of pyramids, each with a unique design, reflecting both aesthetic vision and engineering innovation. Every pyramid was also integrated into the surrounding landscape, oriented according to religious and astronomical principles. But pyramids were not Kush's only architectural achievement. The kingdom developed complex palaces, temples, and fortifications that showcased ingenuity, cultural identity, and practical planning. Temples dedicated to gods, such as Apedemek, were often built with towering columns, intricately carved reliefs, and ceremonial courtyards designed to impress both citizens and foreign envoys. Reliefs depicted rulers as semi-divine, demonstrating the intersection of architecture, art, and propaganda. A visitor walking through these temples would witness the fusion of spiritual authority with earthly power, a deliberate visual reinforcement of the kingdom's hierarchy. Water management was another area where Kushite engineering excelled. While the kingdom did not rely on the Nile's annual flood to the same extent as Egypt, it developed canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems to support agriculture, trade, and urban settlements. These systems ensured a steady supply of water, allowed for the cultivation of large areas, and supported both population growth and industrial activity, including the furnaces that powered Kush's iron industry. Effective water management was a survival strategy, as well as a demonstration of technological mastery, giving Kush a strategic advantage over neighboring regions. Innovation extended to metallurgy as well. Meroe became the hub of iron production in Africa, possibly one of the earliest large-scale iron-producing civilizations. The furnaces were carefully designed to reach high temperatures necessary for smelting iron, and the techniques allowed Kushite blacksmiths to produce weapons and tools of exceptional quality. This technological edge not only strengthened the military, but fueled economic prosperity. Iron tools enhanced agricultural output, while weapons ensured territorial control, demonstrating the integrated nature of innovation in the kingdom's growth. Kushite artisans were equally innovative in materials and design. Jewelry, pottery, and sculptures reflected both local aesthetics and influences from Egypt, Arabia, and beyond. Precious metals were combined with intricate carvings, demonstrating mastery of both technique and symbolism. Art was not merely decorative, it reinforced the kingdom's cultural identity, conveyed religious significance, and celebrated the accomplishments of its rulers. In Kush, beauty and function were inseparable. Architectural design also communicated political and spiritual messages. The orientation of pyramids, temples, and palaces was intentional. Structures aligned with celestial bodies, marking solstices, equinoxes, or other astronomical phenomena. This alignment reinforced the perception that rulers were in harmony with cosmic order, legitimizing their reign. Architecture, in Kush, was both a physical accomplishment and a philosophical statement, a visual argument for the divine nature of kingship and the enduring power of the kingdom. Even fortifications reveal Kushite ingenuity. City walls, defensive towers, and strategic positioning allowed the kingdom to repel invasions and control trade routes. Fortresses were not only military installations, but symbols of power and deterrence. The construction reflected a deep understanding of both geography and human psychology. By controlling the landscape and designing intimidating architecture, Kushite rulers projected strength without constant warfare. Kushite innovation also had long-term cultural impact. The techniques, designs, and systems developed in Meroe influenced neighboring African societies for centuries. From pyramid construction to metallurgy, water management to urban planning, Kush demonstrated that African civilizations were capable of technical, artistic, and organizational achievements equal to any in the ancient world. These accomplishments challenge assumptions about technological development in Africa, proving that ingenuity can flourish even in regions outsiders often dismissed as peripheral. Yet, for all its brilliance, Kushite architecture also tells a story of impermanence. Many pyramids, temples, and palaces have fallen to the desert, weather, and time. Yet, even in ruin, they inspire awe, hinting at the scale of ambition, the sophistication of design, and the audacity of vision that defined the kingdom. Every stone carries a message. This was a civilization that refused to be ordinary, that used architecture to assert identity, power, and legacy. The legacy of Kushite engineering is therefore not only in what was built, but in what it represents. It is proof that architecture can embody culture, convey ideology, and integrate technology with aesthetics. It is a reminder that civilizations rise not just through conquest or trade, but through human creativity applied with precision, vision, and ambition. Meroe and the pyramids of Kush stand as enduring monuments to a people who mastered their environment, challenged assumptions, and left an architectural record that continues to astonish the world. Every empire has its twilight, and Kush was no exception. For centuries it had thrived, wealthy, powerful, and culturally sophisticated, but the forces that had once guaranteed its dominance began to shift. External pressures, environmental changes, and internal strife gradually eroded the foundations of a civilization that had once rivaled Egypt and defied Rome. The fall of Kush is a story of resilience, vulnerability, and the lessons empires leave behind. By the 4th century CE, trade routes that had fueled Kush's wealth started to shift. Axial routes through the Red Sea and across the Nile Delta were increasingly controlled by foreign powers, including the expanding Roman Empire and emerging Arab traders. Meroe, once the beating heart of commerce, found its economic influence waning. Iron production, once a hallmark of military and industrial superiority, could not compensate for declining trade and the increased pressure from rivals. The kingdom's riches alone were no longer sufficient to sustain its political and military power. Environmental pressures compounded the problem. Deforestation from centuries of iron smelting had degraded the surrounding landscape, contributing to soil depletion and agricultural instability. Prolonged periods of drought strained water resources, challenging both urban centers and rural settlements. The hydraulic systems that had once supported agriculture and trade faltered, making it difficult to feed the population or maintain infrastructure. Nature, once a resource to be managed, became an unpredictable adversary. Internally, succession disputes and court intrigue weakened cohesion. As powerful queens and kings passed, rival factions often contested authority. The Kandakis, once symbols of unity and strength, faced increasing challenges from ambitious nobles, generals, and rival branches of the royal family. Even minor disputes could escalate into civil conflict, sapping the kingdom's energy and diverting attention from external threats. In an empire so tightly woven around personal loyalty to rulers, fractures in leadership were destabilizing. Externally, Kush faced growing threats from neighboring civilizations. The rise of the Kingdom of Aksum in modern-day Ethiopia introduced a powerful regional competitor. Aksum's trade networks expanded, and its military strength began to overshadow the weakened Kushite forces. Conflict with these neighbors accelerated the kingdom's decline, as Kush could no longer project power or defend its territories as effectively as before. By the 4th and 5th centuries CE, Meroe and its surrounding cities were increasingly vulnerable. Archaeological evidence indicates signs of sudden abandonment, burnt settlements, and a sharp reduction in monumental building projects. The once thriving pyramids became silent witnesses to a civilization in retreat. Historians debate whether this decline was sudden due to conquest or gradual due to compounding internal and external pressures, but the outcome was clear. Kush's political power faded, yet the kingdom did not vanish entirely. Cultural, religious, and technological legacies persisted. Religious traditions, including worship of Epidamak and integration of Egyptian deities, influenced successor societies. Ironworking techniques and urban planning knowledge were passed down to neighboring African civilizations. Even the pyramids and temples of Meroe continued to inspire awe, ensuring that Kush's identity remained embedded in the collective memory of the region. The fall of Kush also underscores a broader lesson about the fragility of even the most powerful civilizations. Economic wealth, military might, and technological innovation cannot protect a society from environmental change, political fragmentation, or shifts in trade dynamics. Kush survived for over 1,000 years because it adapted, innovated, and leveraged its unique resources. Its decline reminds us that sustainability, resilience, and flexibility are as vital to survival as conquest or wealth. Today, the ruins of Meroe and Napata stand as testaments to the ingenuity and endurance of the Kushite people. Archaeologists uncover artifacts, pyramids, and inscriptions that illuminate a civilization capable of producing warrior queens, monumental architecture, and advanced metallurgy. Even centuries after its fall, Kush continues to fascinate historians, inspiring re-examinations of African contributions to world history. The story of Kush is therefore not simply one of decline. It is a story of remarkable achievement, of societies that thrived in challenging environments, and of leaders, particularly the Kandakes, who defied expectations and shaped history. The empire may have fallen, but its legacy endures, a reminder that civilizations are remembered not only for their end, but for what they created, defended, and inspired in their time on Earth. Kush was more than armies, trade, and architecture. It was a civilization rich in art, music, and culture, a society that understood the power of expression to define identity, communicate authority, and inspire generations. The kingdom's art was deeply intertwined with religion, royalty, and everyday life, reflecting a civilization that celebrated beauty, symbolism, and skill in equal measure. Sculpture was central to Kushite culture. Artists carved statues in stone and bronze that depicted kings, queens, and deities with astonishing realism and symbolism. Kandakes were often portrayed larger than life, holding weapons or ceremonial objects, signaling their dual role as rulers and divine intermediaries. Deities were depicted with human bodies and animal heads, embodying both strength and divine wisdom. Reliefs on temple walls captured scenes of conquest, ritual, and daily life, providing a visual narrative of the kingdom's values and achievements. Jewelry and decorative arts were equally sophisticated. Gold, ivory, and semi-precious stones were meticulously crafted into necklaces, bracelets, crowns, and ceremonial items. Artisans combined local styles with influences from Egypt, Arabia, and the Mediterranean, producing works that were both aesthetically stunning and politically symbolic. Jewelry often denoted rank, with intricate designs reserved for royalty, reinforcing social hierarchy through beauty and craftsmanship. Pottery and ceramics also flourished. Functional objects were adorned with intricate patterns, reflecting both artistic skill and cultural symbolism. Bowls, jars, and figurines often featured geometric designs, depictions of animals and scenes from mythology. These objects were not only utilitarian, but carried cultural meaning, connecting daily life to the spiritual and social world of Kush. Music and dance were integral to religious ceremonies, festivals, and royal events. Percussion instruments, stringed lyres, and wind instruments accompanied ritual performances, invoking divine favor and celebrating victories. Dance was often both spiritual and political, with movements representing cosmic order, martial prowess, or societal harmony. These performances reinforced communal identity, linking the population to the rulers and the gods in shared experience. Literature and writing reflected Kushite sophistication. The Meroitic script, still partially undeciphered today, shows a culture capable of abstract thought, record-keeping and complex communication. Inscriptions document royal decrees, religious dedications, and historical events, preserving the voice of a civilization that understood the power of language to immortalize ideas and influence generations. Art and culture were also tools of diplomacy. Gifts of finely crafted jewelry, sculptures, or ceremonial objects were exchanged with foreign powers, signaling both wealth and sophistication. Kushite art communicated that the kingdom was a center of civilization, worthy of respect and alliance. It was soft power in a tangible form, persuasive, beautiful, and lasting. Even in decline, the art of Kush endured. Many pieces survived the fall of Meroe, hidden in tombs or protected by the desert, revealing a civilization that valued permanence and legacy. Today, museums and archaeological sites showcase these works, reminding the world that Kush's influence was not only military or economic, but deeply cultural. Ultimately, Kushite art and culture reflect the soul of the kingdom. They reveal a civilization that celebrated power, beauty, faith, and ingenuity. Through sculpture, jewelry, music, writing, and ritual, Kush left a legacy that continues to inspire awe, proving that the true strength of an empire lies not only in conquest, but in the creativity and vision of its people. Kush was never isolated. Its power and influence extended far beyond its borders, shaping interactions with Egypt, Rome, Arabia, and sub-Saharan Africa. The kingdom understood that survival and prosperity depended not only on military strength or wealth, but on diplomacy, alliances, and the strategic projection of influence. Kushite rulers were astute negotiators, balancing aggression with tact, and often using soft power as effectively as force. Relations with Egypt were central to Kushite diplomacy. Egypt had been both conqueror and conquered, and Kushite rulers navigated a complex relationship with their northern neighbor. At times, Kushites controlled Egypt directly, as during the 25th dynasty when Nubian kings ruled the Nile Valley. At other times, they were forced to coexist with Egyptian powers. Trade, intermarriage, and cultural exchange created mutual dependency, while military campaigns and border disputes tested strength and resolve. Kush demonstrated an uncanny ability to adapt, asserting sovereignty without provoking unnecessary conflict, and exploiting opportunities to expand influence when circumstances allowed. Kush also engaged with the Roman Empire. The confrontation with Rome during Amanirenas' reign is legendary, not just for military daring but for the diplomacy that followed. Kush negotiated from a position of strength, compelling Rome to withdraw without tribute and recognize its territorial sovereignty. The kingdom's ability to influence the world's most powerful empire of the time demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of international relations and the use of both threat and negotiation to protect interests. Trade networks were a vital instrument of diplomacy. Kush's wealth in gold, ivory, and iron made it a sought-after partner. Envoys carried gifts, exchanged knowledge, and forged agreements that reinforced both economic and political ties. Through trade, Kush projected soft power across the Red Sea, the Nile, and into the broader African interior. The kingdom's influence was not only in wealth, but in its ability to integrate foreign contacts into its political and cultural sphere. Alliances with neighboring African kingdoms further reinforced Kushite power. Rulers leveraged marriage, diplomacy, and ceremonial recognition to maintain regional stability and secure borders. These alliances were practical and symbolic, demonstrating that Kush could lead not through coercion alone, but through a network of mutual respect, obligation, and shared prosperity. Such relationships also help safeguard trade routes, ensure military support, and maintain the kingdom's position as a dominant African power. Kush's influence extended culturally as well. Religious practices, art and writing spread through interactions with Egypt, Arabia and other African societies. Kushite deities, architectural styles and burial customs influenced neighboring kingdoms, leaving a lasting imprint on the region. The kingdom became a center of innovation, diplomacy and cultural exchange, demonstrating that influence is rarely achieved by force alone. It requires vision, adaptability, and strategic relationships. Even during periods of internal instability or environmental stress, Kush's international standing provided leverage. Its reputation as a military power, economic hub, and culturally sophisticated kingdom allowed it to negotiate favorable terms with external powers. Diplomacy became a survival tool, ensuring that the kingdom could endure challenges that might have destroyed less capable states. In essence, Kush in the wider world exemplifies a civilization that understood power in its most complete form. Military strength, wealth, culture, and religion were all integrated into a strategy of influence. Kushite rulers knew when to fight, when to negotiate, and when to project authority through symbols, trade, and alliances. The kingdom's ability to engage effectively with neighboring and distant powers allowed it to endure for centuries, leaving a legacy that resonates in African and global history. The story of Kush is a story of resilience, ingenuity, and enduring influence. Centuries after its pyramids were abandoned and its cities fell silent, the legacy of this African empire continues to inspire historians, archaeologists, and anyone who seeks to understand the power and complexity of ancient civilizations. Kush's lessons are not only historical, they are timeless, offering insights into leadership, strategy, and the human capacity to create lasting impact. One of the most striking aspects of Kush's legacy is its demonstration that power can be exercised in multiple forms. The Kandikes, warrior queens, challenged assumptions about gender and leadership, proving that authority is earned through vision, courage, and capability, not merely inherited or assigned. Their example reshapes our understanding of what leadership can look like, emphasizing adaptability, intelligence, and the integration of diverse roles, military, spiritual, and political, into one cohesive strategy. Kush's achievements in architecture, metallurgy, and urban planning also provide a blueprint for sustainable innovation. The pyramids of Meroe, the temple complexes, and the sophisticated ironworking industry showcase a civilization that harmonized aesthetics, functionality, and technological advancement. These accomplishments remind us that cultural and technological innovation can elevate a society, leaving tangible markers of its ingenuity for future generations to study and admire. Trade and diplomacy further define Kush's enduring influence. The kingdom's ability to leverage wealth, resources, and strategic alliances demonstrates that influence is not built solely through conquest, but through vision, negotiation, and soft power. Kush's rulers understood that sustainable authority depends on networks, economic, political, and cultural, that extend beyond borders. This lesson resonates today. Empires rise and fall, not only because of armies, but because of their ability to connect, influence, and adapt to changing circumstances. Religion and culture were equally central to Kush's enduring impact. The integration of spiritual practice into governance created a sense of legitimacy that bound society together. Artistic expression, ritual, and ceremonial life strengthened identity and transmitted values across generations. Even after the kingdom's political decline, these cultural legacies endured, influencing neighboring regions and providing a historical record of the kingdom's worldview, priorities, and achievements. Perhaps the most profound lesson from Kush is its testament to resilience. Despite environmental challenges, shifting trade routes, and aggressive neighbors, the kingdom endured for over a millennium. Its ability to adapt through leadership, innovation, and strategic foresight allowed it to thrive in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Kush demonstrates that longevity is rooted in flexibility, foresight, and the willingness to integrate multiple sources of power: economic, military, cultural, and spiritual. Kush also challenges modern perceptions of African history. For too long, African civilizations have been overlooked or underestimated in global narratives. Yet Kush rivaled and often surpassed contemporaneous powers in military, architectural, and cultural achievements. Its story forces a re-evaluation of assumptions about technology, governance, and influence in ancient Africa, proving that the continent was home to civilizations that shaped the world on their own terms. The empire's visual legacy, the pyramids, temples, and artifacts, continues to captivate the imagination. Each structure, each piece of jewelry, each inscription is a testament to human creativity and ambition. These remnants remind us that even when political systems collapse, the ideas, innovations, and culture of a society can endure, influencing generations long after rulers have passed. Finally, the story of Kush is a human story. It is about ambition, courage, and the pursuit of greatness. It is about queens who defied expectations, kings who forged empires, and people whose daily labor sustained one of the most remarkable civilizations in history. It is a story of identity, resilience, and the unyielding desire to leave a mark on the world. For modern viewers, Kush is not just a chapter in history, it is an example of what is possible when vision, leadership, and innovation converge. It reminds us that greatness is multi-dimensional. It encompasses strength, culture, wisdom, and the courage to defy conventions. The legacy of Kush continues to inspire because it represents the heights humanity can reach when it dares to dream, build, and endure. The echoes of this empire are still felt across Africa and the wider world. Its pyramids stand as silent witnesses to ingenuity, its artifacts tell stories of power and beauty, and its history challenges us to recognize the complexity and significance of African civilizations. Kush may have fallen, but its influence endures, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and creativity. The story of Kush is complete, but its lessons are eternal.